The energy inside Studio 6B, typically a crucible of frantic excitement, carried a different, heavy kind of energy the night Johnny Depp walked onto the stage. It was not the chaotic, lightweight celebrity hysteria usually reserved for pop stars or viral sensations. This was profoundly heavier, warmer, almost reverent, a feeling that bordered on the sacred and the historical. The atmosphere was intensely weighted by years of history, by bitter controversy, by undeniable artistic resilience, and by the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of a cultural icon returning to the most unforgiving spotlight after a period of isolating darkness. The air itself seemed thick with unspoken narratives, complex, demanding emotion, and the collective, anxious anticipation of the hundreds gathered. The audience didn't scream. Their reaction was far deeper. They rose as one unified, powerful entity, applauding with a deep, sustained, almost tidal intensity that built slowly, not frantically, as if welcoming a beloved, wounded legend returning from a long, silent, and brutal battlefield. Their applause was a sound of collective recognition, complex public forgiveness, and demanding expectation, acknowledging the enormous, visible, and invisible emotional journey he had endured outside the protective walls of Hollywood. They were demanding the truth. Johnny sat down with a gentle, slow nod, the smooth leather of his vintage jacket whispering against the fabric of the couch. His signature heavy rings tapped softly, rhythmically against the armrest as he settled in, a nervous, almost subconscious metronome marking the precise, agonizing time between the expectation of the public image and the fragile reality of the private self. He looked composed, polite, even playfully introspective. The charming trickster persona millions had adored for decades was firmly in place, a meticulously maintained masterpiece of cool, elusive disinterest. Every visible detail of his appearance, the layers, the accessories, the careful gaze, served as an elaborate artistic armor against intrusion. The interview started lightly, almost academically, to ease the massive tension. Jimmy, sensing the profound need for a gradual, cautious, and respectful approach, kept the initial topics deliberately breezy. Anecdotes about old-set eccentricities, bizarre encounters with legendary directors, late-night songwriting sessions with musician friends, and the strange, unexpected comfort of solitude found away from the punishing gaze of the press. He was funny. He was controlled. He was unmistakably Johnny Depp, the consummate storyteller, the fascinating myth, the quiet survivor. Every anecdote was perfectly framed, every laugh delivered with surgical precision, every word carrying the practiced, intellectualized weight of an artist, deeply skilled in managing his own narrative. The surface was impeccable, betraying nothing. But Jimmy, the expert conductor of the night's emotional landscape, felt something profoundly, disturbingly unsettling beneath the surface. He was expertly scanning for the anomaly. He noticed a persistent tightness in Johnny's smile that didn't quite reach the deep, haunted recesses of his eyes. A fraction of a second delayed reaction to Jimmy's jokes, as if the input had to travel a great psychological distance before the required predictable output could be manufactured. A hollow echo in the laughter that used to feel infectious and fill entire rooms. It was the palpable, chilling presence of a ghost in the machine, a man operating his own well-oiled persona from a great distance, watching himself perform the role of Johnny Depp, the survivor. So Jimmy, leaning into the vulnerability established by the sheer heavy weight of the audience's welcoming applause, asked a gentle yet psychologically precise question that deviated sharply from the note cards and the prepared talking points, a question that cut through the artifice with the precision of a laser. "Johnny, after everything you've weathered, after the long, deafening silence, what truly surprised you most about finding yourself again? What did the quiet reveal when you finally let it in?" It was a harmless question. A cliché of the comeback interview, a softball lobbed for a controlled philosophical answer. But it hit directly in the softest, most unprotected part of him. It struck the core of his existential identity crisis with surgical force, shattering the internal dam. Johnny blinked. Something fundamental changed in the deep-set concentration of his eyes. The practiced defense system that had guarded him for years against prying eyes suddenly, visibly, seemed to power down, leaving him terrifyingly exposed. The composure was failing instantly. The audience didn't know what it was yet, but they sensed it. A shift in gravity so profound that every microphone in the room registered the sudden, total, terrifying absence of background noise. The silence was palpable. The cameras held absolutely still, capturing the raw, audible intake of breath. Johnny leaned back slowly, his eyes lowering not in intellectual thought or contemplation, but in painful, involuntary memory, as if someone had pulled a curtain open behind his ribs, exposing a raw, inner chamber of his soul that had been locked away for years under the pressure of fame and conflict. When he finally spoke, his voice was not the familiar, mischievous, low drawl that characterized his public appearances. It was quieter, lower, almost tragically fragile, resonating with a weariness that went bone deep, a voice stripped of its stage power and its charisma. "You know, Jimmy, I think the hardest part wasn't actually losing myself. That, in a way, was the easiest thing to do, under the circumstances of public warfare and relentless character performance. It was realizing, once the battle was over and the legal and media noise subsided, that I didn't know how to come back. The road back to self was entirely unmapped, unlit, forgotten, and perhaps had never been built at all. I was a man without an inner blueprint." Studio 6B went dead silent. This was not a performance, not a prepared story from a publicist, not a manicured late-night moment. This was an agonizing, spontaneous, and televised confession of a soul in recovery. Jimmy straightened abruptly, his trademark smile instantly dissolving from his face, replaced by an expression of raw, unmediated shock, profound concern, and sudden ethical awareness. He looked visibly and professionally unprepared for the depth of the truth being offered. His only goal now was to create a zone of safety for the man sitting beside him. Johnny continued, his fingers trembling slightly over his iconic collection of rings, the metal tapping softly, a nervous, persistent metronome in the vast silence. "I spent years being spoken for, judged, legislated, reshaped by narratives and headlines, broken down into sound bites and labels. I didn't recognize the man people were arguing about. I was just a fictional, malleable construct of other people's anger, trauma, or desperate adoration. The real man vanished into the roles, and the roles became the argument, the shield, and the trap." His voice cracked, barely, a near imperceptible shudder, but enough for the entire room, and the camera zoomed in to capture the emotion, to feel the profound, aching weight of that admission. The vulnerability was unbearable, a catastrophic breach in the celebrity contract. When the noise finally stopped, when the lawyers packed up their files, and the cameras finally moved on, I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, someone utterly exhausted, worn down to the bone, someone deeply scared of the silence and the lack of direction, someone who hadn't been genuinely, quietly, privately loved in a very long time. Not the idea of me, the star, the icon, but the man standing there alone, with nothing but his own complex and confusing history. A woman in the front row was quietly weeping, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth to suppress the sound. A man beside her wiped his eye with the back of his hand, his chin trembling. Jimmy swallowed hard, his face a mask of empathetic grief and sudden, absolute respect, leaning forward, pushing his entire body across his desk in an instinctive, profound act of protective empathy. "Johnny, please, you don't have to share anything you don't want to. We can stop. We can move on to the guitar story. We can cut to commercial right now." Jimmy's voice was barely a whisper, a genuine lifeline tossed into the dark emotional chasm. Johnny shook his head gently, a slow, decisive, and final motion of refusal. "No, Jimmy, I think I need to. I've been holding this inside, carrying this crushing silent weight for too many years. It has become too heavy now. If I don't say it, here, in the light, where everyone can see it, it will never be said. and I will be stuck in that silence forever. The lie must end now. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had played iconic characters, held guitars, painted canvases, survived storms, and faced unimaginable public scrutiny. He looked at them as if they belonged to someone else, disconnected from the core him. People think the hardest part is the accusations, the headlines, the noise, the public humiliation, but that's only the performance of the pain, the superficial external injury. The hardest part is the silence after, when it's just you, and the truth you're afraid to say out loud to your own reflection, that the armor never came off because you forgot who was underneath it, and you don't know how to reintroduce yourself. Jimmy froze, visibly, emotionally. His eyes widened, his lips pulled thin. He was suspended in a moment of pure, unadulterated human empathy, utterly unable to move or speak for fear of breaking the fragile, terrifying spell. Johnny's voice dropped to a final, devastating whisper, intimate enough for only Jimmy and the sensitive boom microphone to capture. I realized I'd spent so long performing for the world, performing the role of the star, the outcast, the genius, the survivor, that I forgot how to simply be a person, a real one, without costumes, without characters, without armor, or the protection of a script. My life became a character, and the character became my comfortable, yet suffocating prison. I am seeking my extradition from the self I created. The audience didn't breathe. Their silence was total, a collective physical act of holding profound space for his agony, a shared understanding of the terrifying cost of public life. Johnny looked up, his eyes shining under the warm stage lights, not crying, but holding back something far more heartbreaking, a desperate, fragile plea for simple, honest, human recognition. I am learning how to be human again, Jimmy. I am taking the armor off piece by agonizing piece, and I don't think I've ever done it on camera before. This is the hardest, most unscripted, and most essential role I've ever had to play. It requires vulnerability, not genius. Jimmy placed his hand firmly on the wooden desk, steadying himself, anchoring himself against the massive, emotional seismic shift that had just occurred. Johnny, you're safe here. You are completely safe now. Thank you for the profound courage of showing us who you truly are. It means everything. Johnny nodded slowly, accepting the gesture with a deep, shaky inhale. For the first time all night, his smile wasn't practiced. It wasn't charming. It wasn't designed for a camera or a magazine cover. It was small, shy, human, and absolutely tragically real. Studio 6B erupted into a thunderous, emotional standing ovation, not for the actor, not for the legend, not for the pirate or the Mad Hatter, but for the man who had finally, agonizingly, stepped out from behind himself. The audience recognized the profound, difficult act of courage required to reveal the human being beneath the myth, and they roared their approval for his survival and his honesty.